Hi, my name is Jake, and I'm 27 years old. I work as a graphic designer, spending most of my time creating digital art and designing visuals for clients. On the surface, I guess you could say my life seems pretty normal. But there's something that's been bothering me for as long as I can remember. Something that cuts deeper than I usually like to admit. I'm the middle child in a family of 5. My parents, Mark and Linda, are your typical hardworking couple who've always provided for us. Then there's my older sister, Emily. She's 31, the golden child of the family. Emily's always been the smart, accomplished one, the one who wins awards, excels at work, and seems to do everything right. You know the type. And then there's Ryan, my younger brother, who's 22. He's the baby of the family, and honestly, he knows it. Ryan has this way of getting away with just about anything. If he messes up, it's brushed off as boys will be boys. Meanwhile, I'm just Jake, the one in the middle. It's hard to explain what it feels like to be the forgotten one. It's not like my family hates me or anything, but I've always felt like I'm stuck in the shadows of my siblings. Emily gets celebrated for every achievement, no matter how small, and Ryan is the one everyone rushes to protect or help out when he's in trouble. Meanwhile, I'm over here doing my best to stay afloat, but it feels like no one even notices. I remember one time when I was about 14, I scored the winning goal for our school's soccer team during a big game. I was so excited to share the news with my family. But when I got home, Emily was already talking about her college scholarship offer, and Ryan had just broken his arm after falling off his bike. My news didn't stand a chance. It was like my moment was swallowed up before it even began. Moments like that have piled up over the years, and honestly, they've left me feeling invisible. But here's the thing, I've never wanted to make a big deal out of it. I mean, they're my family, right? You're supposed to support each other, not compete. So I've always told myself to let it go. I've tried to brush off the small slights and remind myself that no family is perfect. There's no use rocking the boat over something as silly as being ignored during dinner or forgotten during a family photo. At least that's what I've always told myself. Still, it's hard to ignore how these things add up. There have been so many times when I've felt like an afterthought, like I'm just there to fill the space between Emily's achievements and Ryan's antics. Family gatherings, for example, are a perfect example of what I mean. We'll all sit around the table, and everyone's talking about Emily's promotion or Ryan's latest adventure. Meanwhile, if I try to join the conversation, it's like my words evaporate the moment they leave my mouth. Either that or someone interrupts me halfway through. It's exhausting, honestly. I guess part of me hoped it was just a phase, like something I'd grow out of or something my family would eventually notice and fix on their own. But here I am, 27 years old, and nothing's really changed. If anything, it's gotten worse. These days, I feel like I'm just existing in the background. I go to family events, I laugh when I'm supposed to, and I try to fit in, but deep down, it feels like I'm not really part of the picture. And yet, I've never confronted them about it. Maybe it's because I'm scared of being seen as selfish or overly sensitive. Or maybe it's because I've convinced myself that this is just how it is, that every family has someone who gets less attention, and in our family that someone is me. But lately, I've started to wonder if that's really true. Should I have to settle for being invisible just to keep the peace? Is that what family is supposed to feel like? Don't get me wrong, I love my family. I really do. I know they're not bad people, and I don't think they're intentionally trying to hurt me. But that doesn't make it hurt any less. Sometimes it's the unintentional slights that sting the most, because they remind you of how little you matter in someone else's eyes. The reason I'm telling you all this is because, well, something happened recently that forced me to really confront these feelings. For years, I've tried to stay patient and understanding. I've told myself it's not worth making a fuss. But this time, I couldn't just brush it off. This time, it felt like they crossed a line I couldn't ignore. And honestly, it changed everything. A few weeks ago, my family and I spent a full week together at my parents' house. It was supposed to be one of those rare chances for everyone to catch up, spend quality time together, and make memories. But for me, it turned out to be the week that everything changed. Now, before I get into what happened, there's something you should know. My birthday fell smack in the middle of that week. At first, I thought, how perfect is this? Everyone would already be together, no scheduling issues, no excuses for missing it. I wasn't expecting a big celebration or anything, but, maybe a cake or a simple happy birthday. Something to show that I mattered. But as the day approached, I started to get this sinking feeling in my stomach. No one had mentioned my birthday, not even casually. Usually, my mom would at least ask what kind of cake I wanted, but this time there was nothing. I tried to brush it off, thinking maybe they were planning a surprise or just hadn't brought it up yet. When the day finally arrived, I woke up feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness. I came downstairs and everyone was already in the kitchen, Emily sipping her coffee and scrolling through her phone, Ryan talking about some party he went to the week before, and my parents chatting about random things. I walked in and said good morning, expecting at least a cheerful happy birthday. In return, nothing. They barely even looked up. My mom said, "Good morning, Jake," without so much as a second glance, and my dad was too busy reading the newspaper to notice me. Emily and Ryan didn't say a word. It was like any other day. No mention of my birthday, no cake, no card, nothing. I kept waiting, thinking, maybe they're saving it for later. Maybe they'll surprise me at dinner. But deep down, I already knew. As the day went on, it only got worse. Every time I tried to join a conversation, someone would cut me off or talk over me. It wasn't even subtle. At one point, I started telling a story about a new project I was working on, and Emily interrupted me mid-sentence to talk about some client she'd landed at work. Everyone immediately shifted their attention to her, like I hadn't even been speaking. I just sat there, staring at my half-empty plate, feeling smaller and smaller by the second. That night at dinner was the final straw. We were all sitting around the table, and I asked anyone, to pass the salt. I waited, thinking maybe they hadn't heard me. So I asked again, louder this time, but still nothing. Not even a glance in my direction. It was like I didn't exist. At that moment, something inside me snapped. I don't know if it was anger, sadness, or just pure exhaustion, but I couldn't take it anymore. I sat there, frozen, trying to process what was happening. Was this deliberate? Were they actually ignoring me on purpose? Or was I just being paranoid? I started replaying the week in my head, noticing all the little things I'd brushed off before, how no one seemed to acknowledge me when I walked into a room, how my comments were constantly ignored, how the atmosphere didn't change whether I was there or not. The worst part was, I couldn't figure out what I'd done to deserve it. Had I upset them somehow? Was this some kind of punishment I didn't know about? The more I thought about it, the more confused and hurt I became. I ended up excusing myself from the table early that night. I told them I wasn't feeling well and went upstairs to my old bedroom, where I sat on the bed, staring at the ceiling. My thoughts were racing, and for the first time, I started to feel genuinely angry. Not just sad or disappointed, but angry. How could they forget my birthday? How could they treat me like I was invisible? And the thing is, it wasn't just about the birthday. It was about everything. All the years of being overshadowed, ignored, and brushed aside had finally come to a head. This week had taken all those little moments and amplified them to the point where I couldn't ignore it anymore. I started to wonder, was this who I was to them? Just someone they could forget about? Someone who didn't matter? And if that was the case, what was the point of trying so hard to be part of a family that didn't seem to care about me? That night, as I lay in bed, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let this slide. For years, I told myself to keep quiet, to be patient, to let things go for the sake of keeping the peace. But this time was different. This time I felt like I needed to do something, not for them, but for me. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do yet, but one thing was clear: I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. Something had to change, even if it meant finally standing up for myself and risking whatever came next. Looking back now, that week was a turning point for me. It was the moment I realized that staying quiet and hoping things would get better wasn't enough. If I wanted things to change, I had to take the first step, even if it meant walking into uncharted territory. And honestly, I had no idea what was waiting for me on the other side. The first couple of days after that dinner felt surreal. I kept hoping that maybe I was just overreacting. Maybe my family wasn't ignoring me on purpose. Maybe they were just distracted, busy, or caught up in their own worlds. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized how deliberate it all seemed. It wasn't just one moment or one day, it was a pattern that had stretched across the entire week. And the fact that they forgot my birthday only cemented the idea that I was truly invisible to them. But before I let myself spiral into anger or sadness, I decided to test my theory. I needed to know for sure if they were ignoring me on purpose or if I was imagining things. So I started with something small. The next morning, I left the front door wide open when I went out for a quick walk. I figured someone would notice, right? I mean, an open door isn't exactly subtle. But when I came back about 20 minutes later, the door was still wide open. No one had even bothered to close it. I walked inside and saw Emily on the couch scrolling through her phone, Ryan playing a video game, and my parents chatting in the kitchen. They didn't even look up as I walked past them. I felt a strange mix of frustration and validation. On one hand, their indifference confirmed what I'd been feeling all along. On the other hand, it hurt a lot more than I expected. Still, I wasn't ready to give up. I told myself maybe that wasn't enough to get their attention. Let's try something else. So I went upstairs to my old room and turned on some loud music. Not blaringly loud, but loud enough that it should have made someone knock on my door and ask me to turn it down. I waited. 5 minutes. 10 minutes. 15. Nothing. No one came up. I even tried stomping around the house as I walked. I made deliberate, heavy footsteps, hoping someone would notice and say, "What's with all the noise?" But nope. Still nothing. At dinner that night, I decided to switch tactics. Instead of testing them passively, I tried to engage them directly. I started by asking Emily about her work, something I knew she loved to talk about. She gave me a one-word answer and then immediately turned to Ryan to discuss something completely unrelated. I tried again, this time directing my question to Ryan. "Hey Ryan, how was that party you were talking about the other day?" He mumbled it was fine without even looking at me and continued eating. I felt like a ghost at the table. By the end of the meal, I was desperate for any kind of acknowledgement, so I asked my parents about their plans for the weekend. My dad gave me a vague nothing much, and my mom didn't even respond. She was too busy clearing the table. It was like I wasn't even there. And the more it happened, the more I started to internalize it. Maybe I really didn't matter to them. Maybe I was just background noise. I spent the next day testing more experiments. I purposely spilled a small glass of water in the kitchen, letting it splash onto the floor to see if anyone would notice. My mom walked right past it, and my dad didn't even glance in my direction. Later, I accidentally knocked over a chair in the living room while rearranging things. Emily looked up for half a second, rolled her eyes, and went back to her phone. Every little test I tried just reinforced the same conclusion: I was invisible to them. And with each passing moment, the hurt grew deeper. It wasn't just about being ignored anymore. It was about what that kind of rejection does to your self-worth. I started questioning everything. Was it something I said? Something I did? Had I unintentionally pushed them away without realizing it? But even as those thoughts crossed my mind, a part of me knew I wasn't to blame. This wasn't about me being a bad son or brother. This was about them not seeing me, not valuing me. And the more I thought about it, the angrier I became. But I didn't want to lash out, not yet at least. I wanted to see how long they would keep this up. Would they eventually notice me? Would they feel guilty? Or would they just continue pretending I didn't exist? So I decided to wait. I stopped trying to engage them altogether. No more tests, no more loud noises, no more attempts at conversation. I wanted to see if anyone would come to me on their own, if anyone would notice the silence I was giving in return. Spoiler alert, they didn't. Days passed and nothing changed. My family carried on as if everything was perfectly normal. Meanwhile, I felt like I was slowly unraveling. The rejection was eating away at me, but I refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing how much it hurt. Looking back, I think that was the moment I realized something had to give. I couldn't keep living like this, pretending to be okay when I clearly wasn't. But at the time, I didn't know what to do. All I knew was that the more they ignored me, the more determined I became to make them see me. And that's when I decided I wouldn't let this go any longer. By the 6th day of being ignored, I was running on fumes. The constant rejection was exhausting, and I couldn't figure out what hurt more, the fact that my family was ignoring me, or the fact that they seemed perfectly fine doing it. At that point, I was emotionally drained, but I wasn't ready to give up just yet. I still had this tiny sliver of hope that maybe, just maybe, someone would notice how much their behavior was affecting me. But that hope disappeared entirely one evening. I was upstairs in my room, lying on the bed and staring at the ceiling, when I heard voices drifting up from the living room. It was Emily and Ryan. At first, I couldn't make out what they were saying, but then I heard my name. Curious, and maybe a little desperate for some kind of acknowledgement, I got up and quietly moved closer to the door to listen. What I heard next made my stomach drop. Emily was laughing, her voice loud and clear. "Did you see Jake at dinner last night? He looked so miserable. He's always sulking about something." Ryan chimed in, snickering. "Yeah, he's so dramatic. It's kind of funny, honestly. He acts like the world is ending just because no one's paying attention to him." Emily laughed even harder. "I know, right? He needs to lighten up. It's not that deep." I stood there, frozen in place as their words sunk in. They thought I was being dramatic? They thought it was funny? All this time, I had been questioning myself, wondering if I was overreacting, if I had done something to deserve this, but now I knew the truth. They weren't just ignoring me by accident. They were doing it on purpose, and they thought it was some kind of joke. That was the moment I hit my breaking point. If they thought ignoring me was so funny, I'd show them how it felt. I decided right then and there to give them a taste of their own medicine. No more trying to get their attention. No more playing along. From now on, I was going to treat them exactly the way they had been treating me, like they didn't exist. The next morning, I put my plan into action. When I walked into the kitchen for breakfast, Emily was sitting at the counter, sipping her coffee. She looked up and said, "Good morning, Jake." I didn't respond. I walked right past her, grabbed a piece of toast, and sat down at the table without so much as a glance in her direction. She frowned, clearly confused. "Jake, did you hear me?" I kept eating my toast, acting like she wasn't even there. Ryan came in a few minutes later, talking loudly about some video game he'd been playing. "Hey Jake, you should check this out. It's pretty cool." I didn't even look up. I just kept eating, completely ignoring him. At first, they both seemed puzzled. Emily kept glancing at me, like she couldn't figure out what was going on. Ryan tried cracking a joke to get my attention, but when I didn't laugh, or even react, he gave up and sat down across from me, muttering under his breath. The real fun started later that afternoon. I was in the living room when Emily came in, holding her laptop. "Jake, can you help me with something? My Wi-Fi isn't working." Normally, I would have jumped up to help her, but not today. Today, I barely even blinked. I pretended to be engrossed in my phone, scrolling aimlessly as if she wasn't standing right in front of me. "Jake?" she repeated, her voice tinged with irritation. Nothing. Eventually, she huffed and stomped out of the room, muttering something about me being rude. I couldn't help but smirk. This was only the beginning. Over the next couple of days, I kept up the act. I ignored their greetings, refused to answer their questions, and acted like they were completely invisible. If Ryan tried to talk to me, I'd walk away. If Emily asked for help, I'd pretend not to hear her. Even my parents weren't spared. When my mom called me from the kitchen, I didn't respond. When my dad asked me to pass the remote, I acted like I didn't hear him. At first, they seemed more confused than anything. Emily tried to brush it off, telling Ryan he's just in one of his moods. But as the hours turned into days, their confusion started to turn into frustration. "Jake, what's your problem?" Ryan snapped one evening after I ignored him for the 5th time that day. "Why are you acting like this?" I didn't respond. I just kept scrolling on my phone, refusing to acknowledge him. "Seriously?" he muttered, throwing his hands up in exasperation. "What's his deal?" Emily wasn't handling it much better. By the 3rd day, she was pacing around the house, complaining loudly to anyone who would listen. "He's being so childish. I don't understand what his problem is." Their frustration only fueled my resolve. Every time they got annoyed or confused, it felt like a small victory. For once, they were getting a taste of what it felt like to be ignored, to be treated like they didn't matter. But even as I kept up the act, part of me couldn't help but wonder, how long could I keep this up? And more importantly, would they ever realize why I was doing it? By the 4th day of me giving them the silent treatment, I started to see cracks forming in their composure. At first, it was subtle, small moments where they'd glance my way with confusion or annoyance. But the longer I kept it up, the more obvious their frustration became. Emily was the first to crack. I was sitting in the living room, scrolling on my phone, when she walked in and plopped down on the couch across from me. For a few minutes, she just stared at me, probably waiting for me to acknowledge her. When I didn't, she let out an exaggerated sigh. "Okay, Jake, what is your deal?" she asked, her voice dripping with irritation. I didn't even look up from my phone. Seriously, this is so childish. You're acting like a 5-year-old? I still didn't respond. Instead, I calmly stood up, walked to the kitchen, and grabbed a glass of water, leaving her sitting there fuming. As I left the room, I heard her mutter under her breath, "Unbelievable." Ryan wasn't far behind. He tried a different approach, resorting to passive-aggressive comments to get my attention. One morning, as I was eating breakfast, he walked into the kitchen and started talking loudly, almost as if he was performing for an audience. Man, it must be nice to just sit around and ignore everyone. Some people really know how to make things awkward for no reason. I glanced up at him briefly, then went back to my cereal without saying a word. His smile faltered, and he muttered, whatever, before grabbing his coffee and storming out of the room. Their reactions only fueled my determination. For once, I felt like I was in control. After years of being the one who was ignored, I was finally turning the tables, and it felt oddly empowering. But the real test came when my mom, Linda, tried to intervene. It happened one afternoon when I was sitting on the porch, enjoying the quiet. My mom came outside holding a cup of tea and sat down next to me. For a moment, she didn't say anything, which was unusual for her. Then, she broke the silence. "Jake," she said softly, "what's going on? You've been so distant lately. Is something bothering you?" I didn't respond. Instead, I stared out at the yard, pretending to be lost in thought. She tried again. "Jake, I'm talking to you. Please don't ignore me. If something's wrong, we can talk about it." This time, I stood up without a word and walked back inside, leaving her sitting there alone. It wasn't easy. A part of me wanted to turn around and tell her everything, to let her know how much their behavior had hurt me. But I knew that if I gave in now, they wouldn't truly understand what it felt like to be invisible. Over the next couple of days, I made a point of withdrawing even further. I stopped doing all the little things I usually did for the family. If the Wi-Fi went down, I didn't bother fixing it, even when Ryan loudly complained from his room. If my mom asked me to pick up groceries on my way home, I conveniently forgot. When my dad needed help moving some furniture, I pretended I didn't hear him and walked right past. It didn't take long for them to notice. Ryan complained nonstop about the Wi-Fi, muttering about how Jake always fixes this stuff and grumbling when I didn't step in to help. My mom sighed dramatically when she realized she'd have to go grocery shopping herself. Even my dad, who's usually the calm one, seemed annoyed when he had to move the furniture without my help. Emily, of course, had the most to say. "This is getting ridiculous," she announced one evening during dinner. "Jake's acting like he's the only person in this house who matters. He's just being petty at this point." I almost laughed at the irony. Petty? Wasn't that exactly what they had been doing to me? Still, I kept my composure, focusing on my plate and refusing to engage. By now, the tension in the house was palpable. Every interaction felt strained, like everyone was tiptoeing around me, unsure of how to handle my silence. And honestly, it felt good. For the first time in a long time, they were the ones feeling the discomfort, not me. But at the same time, I couldn't ignore the weight of it all. As much as I wanted to teach them a lesson, it wasn't easy to keep this up. Deep down, I still loved my family, and a part of me wanted things to go back to normal. But I also knew that I couldn't let them off the hook. Not yet. Not until they truly understood what it felt like to be overlooked, ignored, and taken for granted. So I stayed the course, even as the cracks in their composure grew wider. I could tell they were starting to realize that something had shifted, that I wasn't going to be the same quiet, accommodating Jake they'd always known. And honestly, that realization alone was enough to keep me going. Little did they know the real confrontation was just around the corner. By the time the confrontation finally happened, I could feel the tension in the air every time we were all in the same room. My family had officially reached their breaking point. I knew they were frustrated with me, but honestly, that was the whole point. I wanted them to feel what I had felt for years, ignored, invisible, and overlooked. It was during dinner that everything came to a head. We were all sitting at the table, eating in near silence. The clinking of utensils against plates was the only sound in the room. Nobody was talking, which was unusual for my family. Normally there'd be chatter about Emily's latest work project, Ryan's weekend plans, or my parents' gardening updates. But this time, the silence was heavy, almost suffocating. I kept my focus on my plate, eating quietly like I had been all week. I could feel Emily shooting me annoyed glances from across the table, but I pretended not to notice. Ryan was fidgeting in his chair, clearly uncomfortable, while my parents exchanged uncertain looks. It was like everyone was waiting for someone else to break the silence. Finally, Emily couldn't take it anymore. She slammed her hand on the table, making the plates and glasses rattle. "We get it, Jake. Can you stop this already?" The sudden outburst caught everyone off guard, including me. My mom's eyes widened in shock, and Ryan froze mid-bite, his fork hovering in the air. Emily was glaring at me, her face red with frustration. "Seriously," she continued, her voice rising. "What is your problem? You've been acting like a child all week. Ignoring us, refusing to talk. It's ridiculous." I stayed calm, setting my fork down on the table. For the first time all week, I looked up and met her eyes. My voice was steady, but there was an edge to it that even surprised me. "Stop what?" I asked, tilting my head slightly. I thought this was how we treated each other now. That one sentence was enough to silence the entire room. Emily's angry expression faltered, replaced by confusion. Ryan shifted uncomfortably in his seat, and my mom's jaw dropped slightly. My dad, who had been quietly observing the exchange, leaned back in his chair, his brows furrowing. I let the silence hang in the air for a moment before continuing. "What's the matter?" I asked, my tone calm but firm. "You don't like being ignored? You don't like feeling invisible?" Because that's exactly how I've felt for years. The weight of my words hit the table like a ton of bricks. No one said anything. They just stared at me, their faces a mix of shock and guilt. For the first time, I had their full attention. I began, my voice softer now, but still steady. It wasn't just this past week. It's been like this for as long as I can remember. Every family dinner, every holiday, every conversation, I've always felt like the odd one out. Like I didn't matter as much as Emily or Ryan. I turned to my parents, who were sitting at the ends of the table. Mom, Dad, do you even realize how often I get interrupted or ignored when I try to say something? How often my accomplishments get overshadowed? Or how no one seems to notice when I'm upset? My mom opened her mouth to respond, but I held up a hand to stop her. Please, just let me finish, I said. She closed her mouth and nodded, her eyes glistening. And Emily, I continued, turning to her, you think I'm being childish? Do you have any idea how it feels to hear your own sister laugh about how dramatic I am? To hear you joke about me sulking while I'm sitting upstairs, wondering what I did to deserve being ignored by my own family? Emily's face turned pale. She looked down at her plate, her fingers gripping the edge of the table. Ryan, who had been avoiding eye contact the entire time, finally looked up, his expression filled with regret. I've spent so many years telling myself it's not a big deal, I said, my voice breaking slightly. I've tried to brush it off, to be patient, to keep the peace. But it's not okay. It's not okay to make someone feel like they don't matter, especially when that someone is part of your family. For the first time, I saw genuine guilt in their eyes. My mom was dabbing at her eyes with a napkin. My dad looked down at the table, and even Emily, who was always so confident and outspoken, seemed at a loss for words. I'm not saying this to make you feel bad, I added, my tone softening. I just need you to understand how much it's hurt me. I love all of you, but I can't keep pretending that everything is fine when it's not. The silence that followed was heavy but different from before. This time, it wasn't awkward or tense. It was reflective, as if everyone was finally processing what I had said. Emily was the first to speak. Her voice was quiet, almost hesitant. Jake, I'm sorry. I didn't realize how much we were hurting you. Ryan nodded, his voice barely above a whisper. Yeah, man. I didn't mean to make you feel like that. I'm really sorry. My mom reached across the table and placed her hand on mine. We're so sorry, Jake, she said, her voice trembling. We didn't see it, but we see it now. And we'll do better. I promise. My dad, who had been silent the entire time, finally spoke up. You're right, Jake. We've been blind to how we've treated you, and that's on us. I'm sorry. For the first time in a long time, I felt heard. Truly heard. It didn't erase all the pain or fix everything overnight, but it was a start. And in that moment, I realized that standing up for myself was worth it. The night of the confrontation felt like a turning point. For the first time in years, I had said everything I'd been holding back. My family had finally listened, not interrupted, not dismissed, but truly listened. It was a strange feeling, like a weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying had been lifted. But even after their apologies, I couldn't help but wonder if anything would actually change. The next morning, I woke up feeling lighter, but also cautious. I'd poured my heart out the night before, and while their reactions seemed genuine, I knew that words were just the beginning. Actions were what really mattered. To my surprise, the first change came from Emily. It was small, but it stood out. We were sitting in the living room, both scrolling through our phones in silence, when she suddenly looked up and said, Hey, Jake, can I ask you something? I blinked, caught off guard. Sure, I said cautiously. She hesitated for a moment, then held up her phone. I'm working on this email to a client, but I feel like it sounds a little too formal. What do you think? Emily had never asked for my input before, not on anything that mattered to her at least. I was so used to her dominating conversations and making decisions on her own that it took me a second to process what was happening. When I finally looked at the email and gave her some suggestions, she actually listened. She nodded thoughtfully and even thanked me afterward. It was such a small thing, but it felt like progress. Ryan's effort came later that day. He knocked on my door, something he never did, and poked his head in. Hey, you want to come watch a movie with me? He asked. I raised an eyebrow. A movie? Yeah, he said, scratching the back of his neck. I mean, I figured, I don't know, we haven't really hung out in a while, so yeah, it wasn't the smoothest invitation, but I could tell he was trying. So I said yes. We ended up watching some action movie he'd been raving about, and for the first time in what felt like forever, we actually laughed together. It was nice, normal even. And for a moment, I let myself believe that maybe things really could be different. My parents were a little slower to show change, but when they did, it was noticeable. My mom started making a point of asking about my day, something she hadn't done in years. How's work going? She'd ask while making dinner. Did you finish that big project you mentioned? At first, I wasn't sure if she was genuinely interested or just trying to make up for lost time, but as the days went on, her questions felt less forced. She even started celebrating small things, like when I finished a tough project or landed a new client. One evening, she surprised me by baking my favorite cookies just because. It wasn't a grand gesture, but it felt sincere. Even my dad, who's always been the quiet, stoic type, made an effort. One afternoon, he asked me to help him with a repair in the garage. Normally, it would have been a quick task, me holding the flashlight while he did all the work. But this time, he took the time to teach me what he was doing, explaining each step like I was his equal. By the end of it, I realized he'd been using the time to bond with me in his own way. Over the next few weeks, these small gestures began to add up. Emily would ask for my opinion on things more often. Ryan started including me in his jokes and conversations, and my parents made an effort to acknowledge my contributions. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments where old habits crept back in, but the difference was undeniable. For the first time, I felt like I was truly part of the family, not just an afterthought. Of course, I didn't let my guard down completely. Trust doesn't rebuild overnight, and I wasn't about to pretend that everything was magically fixed. There were still years of hurt that couldn't be erased with a few apologies and kind gestures. But for the first time in a long time, I felt hope, a glimmer of it, but enough to make me believe that things could get better. Looking back, I realized how much courage it took to stand up for myself. It wasn't easy to confront my family, to voice the pain I'd been carrying for so long. There were moments during the silent treatment where I doubted myself, where I wondered if I was being unreasonable or dramatic. But in the end, it was worth it. Speaking up forced them to see me in a way they hadn't before, and it forced me to acknowledge my own worth. The truth is, I had been so focused on keeping the peace that I had forgotten how important it was to advocate for myself. Family isn't supposed to be perfect, but it's also not supposed to make you feel small or invisible. Sometimes, standing up for yourself means shaking things up, even if it's uncomfortable or painful in the moment. As I sat on the porch one evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy, but for the first time, I believed it was a road worth walking. Because in the end, every step I took, every awkward silence, every moment of doubt led me to this. And for that, I'm grateful. I'm a 28-year-old guy, and for as long as I can remember, I've been the one cooking for my family. Not because I wanted to, but because they expected it. I learned how to cook from my grandmother, who passed away recently. She was the kind of person who could turn simple ingredients into something amazing, and I picked up everything I could from her. Out of everyone in the family, I was the only one who really cared about learning her recipes. Growing up, I was always in the kitchen with her, while my cousins and siblings ran around playing. At first, I thought it was special, something just between us. But after she passed, I realized it wasn't about that. It was about everyone else wanting to eat her food without having to put in the effort. And since I was the only one who knew how to make it right, they decided I was the new family cook. It started small, Thanksgiving dinner here, a birthday party there. But before I knew it, I was handling all the cooking for every major event. Weddings, reunions, Christmas, even casual Sunday get-togethers. My parents, aunts, uncles, everyone just assumed I'd be the one in the kitchen, and not once did anyone offer to help. They'd just show up, eat, and then act like I had nothing better to do. I actually wanted to go to culinary school, but my family laughed it off. That's not a real career, they said. Cooking is just a hobby. Instead, I ended up becoming an accountant because it was stable, but even after I got a full-time job, nothing changed. They still expected me to cook for every event, even though I barely had time for myself. And the worst part, I never even got to enjoy the meals. By the time I finished cooking, everyone had already eaten, and I was left with whatever scraps were still on the table. No one else in the family ever lifted a finger. Not my siblings, not my cousins. If I ever asked for help, I'd get half-hearted excuses, too busy, too tired, don't know how. Meanwhile, I was expected to drop everything and make a full spread for 30-plus people at a moment's notice. And they never saw a problem with it. Then came my cousin's wedding. She reached out months in advance, asking if I could cook for the reception, not help, handle everything, for 100 guests. No pay, no compensation, just because you're the only one who can make grandma's recipes taste right. I refused immediately. There was no way I was spending weeks planning, prepping and cooking for a wedding for free. That's when the guilt tripping started. My mom called me, saying it would mean so much to the family if I did it. My aunts chimed in, saying it was my duty to keep grandma's cooking alive. Even my cousin herself acted like I was being selfish, claiming I was ruining her big day by refusing. It was insane, like I owed them my time and effort just because I knew how to cook. Eventually I agreed to compromise. I'd cook only for the rehearsal dinner, but not the wedding itself. They weren't happy about it, but they accepted. Or so I thought. The wedding came, and I was excited to finally attend an event as a guest for once. No sweating in the kitchen, no running around making sure everything was perfect. I could actually sit down, enjoy a meal, and celebrate. Except I wasn't invited. I found out the day before. My cousin's mom casually mentioned that there weren't enough seats at the reception, so they had to cut a few people from the dinner list. I wasn't on it. The person who had cooked for every single family event for years somehow didn't make the cut. I was pissed, but my mom told me to let it go. It wasn't a big deal, she said. I should just be happy for my cousin and not make it about myself. Then came the real slap in the face. A week after the wedding, my younger cousin accidentally let something slip. He was scrolling through photos on his phone and showed me a picture from the reception. The wedding dinner, the beautifully plated dishes, the spreads, the centerpieces. I recognized every single dish. It was my food. Everything I had made for the rehearsal dinner, they took it, repackaged it, and served it at the wedding reception. They had used me, stolen my food, and then uninvited me from the event where it was served. I was in shock. When I confronted my cousin about it, she brushed it off. Well, you weren't using it, she said. And the guests loved it. You should be proud. like I should be grateful that my food was enjoyed by people I wasn't even allowed to sit with. I tried to turn to my parents for support, but they didn't see the problem. It's just food, my mom said. At least they appreciated it. I couldn't believe it. Years of cooking, years of being taken for granted, and now I was being treated like an unpaid caterer who didn't even deserve a seat at the table. That was it for me. I took my story to Reddit to see if I was overreacting. Thousands of people responded. Strangers, complete strangers, had more respect for me than my own family did. They told me what I already knew but didn't want to admit. I was being used, and that's when I decided, never again. After finding out that my cousin used my food at her wedding while conveniently uninviting me from the reception, I wasn't about to let it slide. I dropped a message in the family group chat. Nothing dramatic, just a simple question. Hey, just curious, why was I uninvited from the wedding dinner when you were serving my food? It took a few minutes before the first response came in. My cousin, she said the venue had a strict seating limit and that they couldn't fit everyone. At the time, I believed her. I was annoyed, but figured it was just bad luck. But later, I found out that the venue actually had a 200-person capacity and the wedding had barely 80 guests. Then she added, "We really appreciated the food though. Everyone loved it. Like that was supposed to make it better." I wasn't buying it. A few minutes later, I got a private message from one of my aunts. She wasn't one to get involved in drama, so I was surprised when she told me that the seating limit excuse was a lie. The venue had plenty of space. There were empty seats. My cousin Lisa, one of the few who actually talks to me honestly, chimed in, saying she had been confused when she saw the food because she knew I had cooked it, but no one saw me there. People at the wedding even asked where I was. My cousin's answer, she told them I was too busy to attend. The real kicker, wedding pictures started popping up on Facebook. People were tagging my cousin in posts, raving about the food like she had spent weeks preparing it. One caption even said bride and groom put so much love into every detail, including this amazing meal. I almost commented glad you enjoyed the food I wasn't allowed to eat, but I held back. My younger brother though, he didn't hold back. He saw everything happening in the group chat and lost it. He called my cousin out, saying she had used me, lied to my face, and then had the audacity to take credit for my work. He also pointed out that she never even asked me if she could use the food I cooked for the rehearsal dinner at the wedding. My cousin's response, she doubled down. According to her, I was making a big deal out of nothing. I should be grateful that my cooking was appreciated and that she made sure grandma's recipes were a part of her special day. My mom stepped in, but instead of backing me up, she told me to let it go. It's just one dinner, she said. Family is more important than pride. That was the last straw for me. I blocked my cousin on everything. No more messages, no more calls, nothing. Then something interesting happened. Another family event was coming up, a big reunion we did every summer. I had always been the one cooking for it, except this time I wasn't going to. The panic set in immediately. My mom tried to talk me into making just one dish, so there would be something good on the table. My aunts suddenly got really nice, hinting that they hoped I wouldn't hold a grudge. Even my cousin, the same one who uninvited me from her wedding, had the nerve to send a message through another relative asking if I could at least bring a side dish. I ignored all of them. Then came the passive-aggressive Facebook post. One of my aunts, not even the cousin, she got someone else to do her dirty work, posted something vague about certain people who hold grudges and think they're better than family. A few of my cousins liked the post. That's when I decided to tell my side of the story. I didn't name names. I didn't even say it was about my family. I just made a post explaining the situation. I cooked for every family event for years. I was uninvited from the wedding dinner where my food was served. My cousin took credit for my cooking. When I confronted her, I was told to let it go. The post blew up. People in my extended family started asking questions. Some relatives, who didn't know the full story before, reached out to tell me they were on my side. Even people outside the family, old friends, co-workers, were shocked. Meanwhile, my cousin's little friend group started falling apart. Turns out, a lot of them didn't know she had done this to me. Some started distancing themselves. A couple even reached out to apologize on her behalf. The family was officially divided. Some relatives were firmly on my side, saying what my cousin did was wrong. Others called me petty, saying it was just food, and that I was being dramatic. But here's the thing. None of them were mad about me calling my cousin out. They were mad because they realized they weren't getting free food anymore. After my last post, things got worse. I started getting messages from old friends. People I hadn't talked to in years, asking about the situation. Apparently my cousin had been telling a very different version of events. According to her, I was never uninvited. She claimed I had refused to attend because I was too tired from cooking the rehearsal dinner. She also told people that she had personally made most of the food, and that I had only helped a little. One of my old friends, who was still connected with some of my cousin's wedding circle, sent me screenshots. My cousin was playing the victim. She was saying that I was trying to ruin her wedding memories and turn the family against her over a meal. Then my mom called. She told me to delete my post. Apparently, my cousin had gone to her crying about how she was being harassed because of me. My mom said the post was causing too much drama and that it was embarrassing for the family. I refused. I wasn't going to protect people who lied about me and used me for free labor. If my cousin didn't want people knowing what she did, she shouldn't have done it. Then the seating limit excuse fell apart completely. Another cousin, one of the few who had been honest with me, sent me more screenshots from the wedding venue's website. The seating limit was never a real issue. The venue had space for 200 people. My cousin's wedding had barely 80 guests. She lied. I was never uninvited because of space. They just didn't want me there, but still wanted to use my food. Then something unexpected happened. I got a message from my cousin's husband. I didn't know him well, but he was always polite. The message was simple. I just found out what happened. I'm really sorry. I was told you were too busy and didn't want to come. I didn't realize you were actually uninvited. That wasn't okay. He apologized for her. Meanwhile, my cousin lashed out. She sent me a long, angry text, accusing me of ruining her honeymoon. Apparently, people in her social circle had started asking why I wasn't at the wedding. Instead of owning up to it, she blamed me for making it a big deal. I ignored the message. I was done with her. Then came the next family event. I heard through the grapevine that everyone just expected me to cook again. Even after everything that had happened, my aunts were already making plans based on me cooking the entire meal. So I laid down a new rule. If you want me to cook, you pay me up front. The family lost their minds. They acted shocked that I would even think about charging them. One of my aunts called me and said, "But you've always cooked for free. That's just what family does." Except it wasn't. I cooked for free. They just ate. Then the smear campaign started. My cousin began telling people that I had become money hungry, that I was trying to profit off family, and was acting like some kind of celebrity chef. But this time, it backfired. A few relatives spoke up and said what everyone already knew but never said out loud: they used me for free labor. One of my uncles even admitted that he had assumed I was paid for the wedding food. When he found out I wasn't, he was pissed. Then something else happened. A few relatives, the ones who actually respected me, sent me money. Nothing huge, but some of them actually paid me as a thank you for all the times I had cooked before. They had assumed I was okay with it, but now that they knew the truth, they didn't want to be part of it. Then my mom got involved again. She pulled the classic "can't you just make something small" routine. She tried to guilt me into cooking for the family, saying it was tradition. I told her the tradition was over. At first she kept pushing, but eventually she realized I wasn't backing down. Then something clicked. I started thinking maybe I should have gone to culinary school after all. Strangers on Reddit, old friends, and even a few family members were telling me how talented I was. A few people even asked if I took orders. I started small, making meals for coworkers, then catering small events. Soon I had regular customers, and word spread. They saw my worth, so I made a power move. I told my family that the next meal I cooked, it would be in a restaurant, and they'd have to pay for it. Weeks of silence. That's how long it took before my family finally tried to act like nothing had happened. I got an unexpected group chat invitation from my mom, the message, an invite to the upcoming family potluck. At first I wasn't even asked to bring anything, just told to come and spend time together. Right away, I knew something was up. My mom started with the usual "everyone misses you" routine, talking about moving past the drama. I agreed to come under one condition: I wasn't bringing any food. The chat went quiet for a while. Then, a message popped up from my cousin, the same one who stole my food for her wedding. "It'll be weird without your cooking." I just replied, "Guess you'll have to figure something out." The day of the potluck, I walked in and immediately saw the problem. The food situation was a mess. Everything was store-bought, undercooked, or straight-up sad. Dried-out rotisserie chickens from the grocery store, mac and cheese that looked like a solid block of glue, and a few barely warmed frozen meals sitting in disposable trays. I could tell right away what had happened. They had assumed I'd cave and bring food anyway. My cousin and her mom were standing in the kitchen, whispering frantically to each other. I heard my aunt say, "Well, now what are we supposed to do?" Not even 5 minutes later, my aunt raised her voice, making sure the whole room could hear. "It's just so sad that some people don't want to contribute anymore." She shot me a look. I grabbed a plate and started filling it with their disaster of a meal. That's when a cousin walked up to me quietly and asked, "Hey, could you just help us fix some of this real quick?" I smiled. "Nope, I'm just here to enjoy the food." Then came the taste tests. First bite, the chicken was bone dry. Then came the mac and cheese. It had the texture of wet cardboard, gravy, straight from a jar, barely heated up. People started grumbling, "Who made the mac and cheese?" This stuffing is kinda weird. Did anyone actually season this chicken? Within minutes, fingers started pointing. One of my aunts accused another cousin of ruining the mashed potatoes. Someone else blamed the gravy disaster on my cousin's mom. Full-blown chaos, with the food situation going downhill fast. My cousin, the same one who used my food for her wedding, tried to shift the attention. She turned to me with a forced smile. Well, if you think it's bad, why don't you fix it? I took a slow sip of my drink. Nah, I'm good. One of my uncles burst out laughing. Honestly, this is what y'all get for taking OP for granted. A few other relatives nodded in agreement. My cousin turned bright red. The best part? She tried to copy my recipe and failed. Turns out, she had tried to recreate one of my signature dishes by following my old social media posts and recipes. But without the proper techniques, it was awful. Bland, dry, and missing key details that can't just be copied from pictures. People started pushing their plates away. Some left early. Others were straight up ordering takeout. One last guilt trip as I was getting ready to leave. My aunt pulled out one final desperate line. We're a family. This isn't how family treats each other. I turned back. You mean like how family used me, and then uninvited me from a wedding? Silence. I grabbed my jacket, waved at the relatives who actually respected me, and walked out. By the next day, the group chat was a war zone. Some relatives were calling out my cousin for how she treated me. Others were still acting like I was the bad guy for making things worse. But the best part? Some of my younger cousins messaged me privately. They actually wanted to learn how to cook. I agreed, as long as they were serious about it, not just looking for another free chef. I posted an update. The internet went wild. Top comment: the best revenge is watching them fail without you. Turns out, my cousin's wedding food stunt didn't just burn her relationship with me, it completely torched her reputation. The disaster dinner word got back to me that she tried to host a dinner for her in-laws. She wanted to impress them, so she decided to recreate the wedding menu. My recipes. It was a disaster. The chicken was dry and flavorless, the mashed potatoes were lumpy, and the dessert, completely inedible. Her in-laws were polite about it at first, but someone eventually made a comment, "This is nothing like the food from the wedding." That's when the truth slipped out. A family friend, one of the few who actually knows how to keep their mouth shut normally, accidentally let it slip. OOP actually made the wedding food. He wasn't even invited to the dinner. Right at the table, in front of her husband's family, she was humiliated. A few days later, I got a long-winded text from my cousin. She never mentioned the wedding, never mentioned stealing my food. Just some generic nonsense about how things got out of hand. And sorry if I felt hurt. I left it on read. Then came the real kicker. Out of nowhere, I got a message from an aunt who was part of the whole guilt-tripping wedding drama. Okay, how much would you charge to cater our next event? Oh, now they want to pay. I sent back a price, $150 per person, non-refundable deposit required. Radio silence. Hours passed. Then my mom called. Why are you being so mean about this? I just said, why should I help people who don't respect me? She had no response. That's when my cousin fully lost it. She went on Facebook and made a huge post about how some people hold grudges forever and act like they're some kind of food celebrity now. My younger brother saw it. He commented one sentence. You should have invited him to the wedding, lol. She deleted the post immediately. Meanwhile, my side hustle took off. While my cousin was spiraling, my cooking business was thriving. Friends, co-workers, and even some distant relatives were reaching out to place orders. One by one, family members started testing the waters. Suddenly, they were acting nice. Little comments like, we do miss your cooking, or wouldn't it be nice to have a big meal together? I ignored all of them unless they actually offered to pay. A few weeks later, my mom finally sat me down and said, I didn't realize how much they relied on you. I just nodded. She finally understood, but things weren't going back to how they were. One day, she reached out with one last goodwill gesture. Let's grab a drink and talk. I laughed. You can pay my catering invoice instead. She blocked me. The best part? I'm happier than ever, no more stress. No more being taken for granted. I cook because I love it, not because I'm being forced to. Reddit goes wild. I posted this update. People went crazy. Top comment. The best revenge is living well. And you're living well. The next time they want my cooking, they'll have to make a reservation. Things had been quiet for a while. Too quiet. Then out of nowhere, my cousin messaged me. A long, overly sweet apology. She said she wanted to move past everything and appreciated me so much. No mention of the wedding. No mention of stealing my food. I left it on read. A few days later, a mutual friend filled me in. My cousin was pregnant, and guess what? She wanted me to cater her baby shower. Not only that, but she had already told people I'd do it. She never even asked me. A week later, she invited me out for coffee. Acted extra nice, like nothing had ever happened. Said she wanted us to start fresh. I knew exactly what was coming, so I played along just to see how far she'd take it. After 10 minutes of pretending to catch up, she dropped it. So for my baby shower, I'd love if you could make the food. I want it to be special, like my wedding. I smiled. That'll be $2,000 up front. Her face fell. Cue the guilt trip. She tried everything, but this is for my baby. You're really gonna charge your own family? I just shrugged. You charged me an invite to your wedding dinner. She went silent. Within an hour, she was on Facebook. A long dramatic post about how people in the family only care about money now, trying to paint me as greedy for refusing to do something nice for family. My younger brother commented, "You mean like when you let OP cook your wedding dinner and then didn't invite them?" She deleted the post immediately. Word kept spreading about my food. People were booking me left and right. Then a coworker's friend recommended me to a restaurant owner. They were looking for a chef, the ultimate power move at the family potluck. A few weeks later, there was another family gathering. This time, I brought my own food, just for me. Sat down, enjoyed a perfectly cooked meal while they struggled with another dry turkey and flavorless mashed potatoes. My cousin didn't even make eye contact. A few days later, my aunt called my mom, told her I was being too harsh. For the first time, my mom defended me. "They did enough for you guys. You can cook your own food." I was shocked. One afternoon, she showed up at my work, unannounced, tried to act like everything was fine. I cut her off. "Are you here to book my catering services?" She hesitated. "No? Then I'm busy." She left in tears. No sympathy. A month later, I heard how it went. She tried to DIY the food. Store-bought trays. Some online recipes. Total disaster. Guests were openly disappointed. Her own husband messaged me privately. "I wish you had done the food. She really messed up." I just responded with a thumbs up emoji. People started telling her to just pay me. She snapped, blocked me, stopped coming to family events. No one really cared. Then the restaurant hired me. I was finally doing what I loved, on my own terms. One day, I was at work. Guess who walked in as a customer? My cousin, tried to act like nothing happened. I personally served her meal and made sure she paid full price. Things had never been better. My restaurant gig, amazing. The head chef started featuring my dishes, and they were getting recognition online. Customers were talking, food bloggers were posting, and catering requests rolling in. It didn't take long before I was booked solid. Meanwhile, my family had finally accepted my boundaries. No more calls begging me to cook. No more guilt trips. Some of them even started paying for my food, without complaining. It was a miracle. Of course, not everyone was happy. Mutuals told me my cousin was furious. She hated that I was successful, still wouldn't apologize, still acting like I was the one who wronged her. Then she made her final mistake. She threw a family BBQ. Didn't ask for my help. Didn't mention me at all. This was her moment to prove that she didn't need me. It went horribly. She burned half the food. The rest, undercooked. People literally started ordering takeout. Apparently, her husband had enough. He finally called her out. "You should have just paid OP." Word spread fast. Their marriage was getting tense. All because she refused to admit she was wrong. Then, the biggest moment of my life happened. The restaurant, they offered me a full-time chef position. I quit my day job. Finally, I was making more money than ever, doing what I love. One afternoon, my mom came to visit me at work. After the potluck disaster, my mom started to see things differently. She didn't say much at first, but I noticed small changes. She stopped pressuring me to cook, and she even told my aunt that I deserved respect. Then one day she came to visit me at work. She sat down, ate my food, and after a long pause, she said, "I should have supported you doing this sooner." I didn't say anything, just nodded. I forgave her. But I'd never forget. Months passed. Then, out of nowhere, she sent me one last message. No apology, just a long rambling text about how lucky I was that things worked out. I never responded. She stopped showing up to family events. No one took her side anymore. And honestly, I didn't miss her one bit. I posted my final update. The internet exploded. Top comment, "Living well is the best revenge." And you're living well. No more toxic expectations. No more cooking for ungrateful people. Just success, happiness, and respect. Apparently, she's trying to be an influencer. It's not going well. I started doing online cooking classes. People from Reddit even signed up to learn from me. One night, I took myself out to a fancy dinner, looked at the menu, smiled, because now, people pay me for food. The next time my cousin wants my cooking, she can order it like everyone else. I thought I was finally done with her. Then a mutual friend sent me a link. My cousin had started a food Instagram. The bio, self-taught home chef, passionate about cooking and sharing my journey. The irony nearly knocked me out. At first I ignored it. But then I saw the photos. She was posting my dishes, the same meals I had cooked at family gatherings. The same recipes she claimed were hers. Even the plating was identical. Then she really messed up. One of the pictures, it was a screenshot from my old posts. She didn't even crop out my watermark. I could have called her out immediately, but I wanted to see how deep she'd dig her own grave. So I sent a DM. Love this recipe. Where did you learn it? No response. A few of my friends started commenting on her posts. Wow, this looks just like OP's cooking. She started blocking them, one by one. After enough people called her out, she panicked. Deleted everything. Then she posted a long rant about how some people don't support family and how haters don't want to see others succeed. No one bought it. I thought my mom had finally learned, but she asked me to be the bigger person. She's just trying to do something for herself. Can't you just ignore it? Unbelievable. That was it. I was done. There was no fixing this. No more second chances. She was not family anymore. Turns out, she's actually terrible at cooking. The few people who followed her realized she had no real skills. She quietly deleted the account. No more checking up on her. No more caring. She was officially out of my life. I posted my final update. The internet celebrated. Top comment. Imagine trying to steal the recipes of the person you screwed over. The restaurant promoted me. I started doing pop-up events. Life was good. One day I got a catering request from one of my cousin's former Instagram followers. The universe had spoken. Out of nowhere, her husband reached out. She knows she messed up. She just doesn't know how to admit it. I just laughed and never replied. She spent so much time trying to use me that she forgot to build something of her own. My catering business? Thriving. Every week I was getting more bookings. The restaurant I worked at started featuring my signature dishes, and I was even getting requests for private events. For the first time in years, cooking actually felt fun again. No pressure, no family expecting free labor. Just pure joy. No more messages asking me to cook just one dish. No more last-minute guilt trips. Now, they either support my business or leave me alone. Exactly how it should be. Meanwhile, my cousin was struggling. Word got around that she was struggling financially. After spending too much on her wedding and influencer attempts, fancy backdrops, paid promotions, and high-end kitchen gadgets, her efforts didn't pay off. Then, desperate for a new source of income, she jumped into an MLM. It failed immediately. Shocking, truly. One day I got a long email from her. It was classic cousin behavior. No apology. Just a rambling message about how things got out of hand and how she missed having family around. She was fishing, trying to get me to reconnect. I deleted it. No response. Then something incredible happened. I got featured in a local magazine. A whole write-up about my journey, my food, my business, my name in print. Everything I ever wanted. A few days later, my dad pulled me aside. He looked at me, then at the magazine, and said I was wrong not to support you earlier. It took him years to admit it, and it meant everything. I found out my cousin saw the magazine feature. She didn't say a single word. No Facebook rant. No fake message. She had finally given up. For the first time in forever, I actually took a real vacation. No family obligations. No cooking for freeloaders. Just me, relaxing, enjoying life. A local investor, who had attended one of the events I catered, reached out. He had tasted my food firsthand and was impressed. He wanted to talk business, about helping me open a small restaurant where I could showcase my talent. A full circle moment, from being told cooking wasn't a real career, to owning my own place. A family friend pulled me aside, told me my cousin wanted to talk. I laughed. I have nothing to say, and that was the end of it. Success, happiness, respect, no toxic people. I had finally won. I posted a final message on Reddit. If your family only values you for what you can do for them, they don't deserve you. Thousands of people upvoted it. The internet wanted more. I kept getting messages. When's the cookbook coming out? And honestly, I might actually do it. No one really knows. She faded into the background, completely irrelevant. The best thing I ever cooked up was a life without her in it.